Welcome to the next video on sentence diagramming. Today we're going to talk about diagramming compound words. And compound words are created using the coordinating conjunctions. If you remember back from our videos on parts of speech, there are only 7 coordinating conjunctions. And you can remember them with the acronym FANBOYS. FANBOYS stands for and, nor, but, or, yet, and so. The 7 coordinating conjunctions. And I like to think of these coordinating conjunctions as equal signs. They basically balance 2 items on either side of them, okay? So when we diagram them, we have to first recognize the fanboy, right, in the sentence, and then we have to ask ourselves, what are the 2 balanced elements on either side of that coordinating conjunction? Sometimes it's just 2 words, right, like 2 subjects or 2 verbs, and that's what we would call compound words. Sometimes there's 2 phrases balanced on either side. We call that a compound phrase. And last but not least, sometimes whole independent clauses can be balanced, and that creates a compound sentence. Okay? So this video is only going to talk about compound words, and I'll show you how to diagram them. Okay, so if we just look at what I mean by 2 balanced elements on either side, we can look at the 2 first examples here. First, Mark and Jake walked around the block. Okay, what we should notice first is that and is a conjunction, the bolded word in the sentence, and then we should ask ourselves, what are the 2 things balanced on either side of that conjunction? In this case, it's Mark and Jake. And because Mark and Jake are acting like the subjects in the sentence, they are the doers of the action, right? We would say that's a compound subject, right? In the second example, we have Mark walked around the block and up the ladder. Now we have one subject, Mark, and he's walking. But what we have is not a compound subject, but a compound prepositional phrase. Why? Well, hopefully you realize that the end is the conjunction, right? The bolded word in the sentence, and up the ladder and around the block are both prepositional phrases. Okay, so that's an example of compound phrases. Now, let's take a look at just the basic format for how to diagram compound words in sentences, and it'll change depending on what that compound is. Okay, I have a number of diagrams to look at, sample diagrams, and we'll just spend a minute taking a look at them. If you take a look at example 1, compound subjects, and example 2, compound verbs, you'll notice that the diagram is set up in a similar fashion, but they're flipped, okay? A normal simple sentence, remember, has 1 subject and 1 predicate. And they're both on this horizontal line, okay? But if you've got more than 1, like our example, Mark and Jake, it's going to split that line into 2 things. So you can see that in our compound subjects, we have 1 subject and a second subject, both linked doing the same verb, completing the same predicate, okay? So I like to say that it splits. It splits in this fashion. You still have 1 predicate, but now you've got subject 1 and subject 2 doing that 1 predicate. All right? Now, the verb is set up exactly the same if you have a compound verb. You have 1 subject, but now it splits. I like to call this the rocket. It looks like a rocket to me. And you always link the conjunctions together on a dotted line, just like the examples here. And you have predicate or verb 1 and verb 2. So it splits in that fashion, with the conjunction, the fanboy, going on a dotted line between the 2. Okay? Now, let's take a look at the other examples right below. Examples 3 and 4. We have compound adjectives and compound adverbs. They are very similar to each other. The main difference, as you can see, is we know that adjectives modify nouns in sentences or pronouns, and Adverbs are modifying those verbs, right? So we know that typically a modifier, we're going a slanted line underneath the word it's intending to modify. So if we had a subject, for example, an adjective would go on that slanted line, okay? But if you have two that are describing the same subject linked with a fanboy, now we diagram it just like our example, okay? Again, the fanboy, let's use N, would go on a dotted line connecting those two slanted modifiers, all right? And adverbs are done the same way, only they're under the verb, as you can see in the example. The next thing that I want to talk about is main verbs. Sometimes you'll have a main verb and a helping verb, right? We've learned that that's called a verb phrase. So let's say that we had a sentence like was reading and studying, okay? We know that was is a helping verb. And then reading would be a main verb, but now we have a conjunction and another main verb. Well, you can see in our example here that the way that's diagrammed is we keep the helping verb that applies to both main verbs, you were reading and you were studying, right, on one line, and it splits when it gets to the main verbs, okay? So just be aware of that. And then last but not least, compound objects of prepositions are diagrammed like this example here. So if we had in the park and the field, let's say, okay, we have our preposition in. Now we can't just have one line, we have to split it, and we have park and field. Okay? So you can see an example of how it's split down here. So let's take a look at some real examples and let's diagram them together, all right? The first one I want to take a look at is Mr. Travers teaches at the school and coaches track. The first thing I want you to do is find the fanboy. Hopefully you realize that the fanboy in that sentence, a coordinating conjunction, is and. So then I ask myself, what are the two compound elements, the two balanced things? Remember, if the and is an equal sign, what are the balanced things on either side? In this case, we have two verbs. Verb 1, he teaches, and verb 2, he coaches, okay? So what we have here is a compound predicate. So if you remember back from our first example, we're going to split the diagram when we get to the predicate, to the verb, okay? So we diagram Mr. Travers as a proper noun. First, he's our subject, okay? Firewall. And now we're going to split it. Okay? Because he's doing two things. He's no longer doing just one. What does he do? Well, he teaches and he coaches. I want to link those two verbs together on a dotted line with my conjunction. Okay? Now, I'll cross them off. Keep track of it. Now I have at the school, which answers the question where he teaches. So that is an adverbial prepositional phrase, answering the question where he teaches. Hopefully you remember how to do that. And last but not least, I have track, which is the thing that he coaches. So that's a direct object, right? That goes under, or next to rather, coaches. So this is a compound predicate because it has two verbs. Let's move to the second example. Matt and Dina learn from Mr. Travers. Well, find your compound element. In this case, it's and again. And we have two subjects. So it's going to be set up in the reverse. So, Matt Dina. They both do the same thing. What do? They learn. Put my conjunction on the dotted line. And now I have from Mr. Travers. Well, that's a prepositional phrase answering the question how they learn. So it goes under the verb from, proper noun, Mr. Travers. Let's take a look at the third example. That is a compound subject. Now we have compound. Let's take a look. Here's our conjunction. We're using and a lot in these examples. Remember, it could be any of the families. We have a compound what? Hopefully you're realizing that blue and green both describe the dress. So they're adjectives. This is a compound adjective. Okay? So let's diagram it. What is the sentence about? It's about the dress. That's our subject. Firewall. Let's diagram the predicate first. Has been drying. That's our verb phrase. Has and been are helping verbs, as a reminder, to our main verb drying. And on the clothesline answers the question where. It's adverbial. It's a prepositional phrase, so it goes underneath the verb. And now we have this compound element. Lori's answers the question whose. That's not compound, okay? It's answering the question whose dress. And that's an adjectival question. But blue and green, that's our compound element. Blue, green, they're both answering the question what kind of dress. And that's what's linked with the conjunction and, compound adjectives. Okay, let's take a look at the next example. I looked for the jacket in the house and the car. Our compound element, again, here's our conjunction, is objects of the same preposition in. So we diagram it like this. I looked. What did you look for? Well, I looked for the jacket, right? That answers the question why you looked for jacket. It's a prepositional phrase. Which jacket? The jacket. And now I have in the house and the car, both of them answering where you looked. So that's another adverbial prepositional phrase. In. But now we have to split it because we have two objects of that preposition. House. Which house? The house. Car. Which car? The car. And we link it with the conjunction. Compound objects of a preposition. Last but not least, one more example. Scott jogged quickly and quietly onto the soccer field. We have, again, a conjunction and. The two balanced elements are adverbs that are modifying jog, answering the question how Scott jogged. So we have our subject, Scott, firewall. What did he do? He jogged. How did he jog? Quickly, quietly, linked with the end. I like to cross things off after I use them. And now I have one last prepositional phrase, this answering where he jogged. Onto is a preposition. The field is our object of that preposition. And what kind of field? Well, the soccer field.